From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
Ladies and gentlemen, the General Conference has thus voted to adopt the draft resolution and decided to admit Palestine as member of UNESCO.
The UN's cultural organization UNESCO recognizes Palestine. France supported the vote. The US, Israel, and the UK opposed it, among others. We'll speak with analyst Phyllis Bennis about the US condemnation of the vote. We'll also talk about NATO ending its intervention in Libya and what that means for the rest of Africa. Then 13 NATO soldiers, 12 of them American, die in a suicide bomb attack in Afghanistan. We'll speak with Guardian journalist Jonathan Steele. He spent 30 years in the region, author of Ghosts of Afghanistan, The Haunted Battleground.
Resistance comes because you're there. You're not there because of the resistance. The occupying force itself creates the resistance. And so the crucial thing now is to recognize that the war is unwinnable. It is a stalemate. There is no military victory. And this is the lesson that I'm afraid President Obama hasn't yet learned.
All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. In financial news, stocks in Europe are plummeting today after Greek Prime Minister George Papandreou announced he would put Greece's $179 billion bailout to a referendum. Most opinion polls suggest Greek voters will not accept further austerity measures and will reject the bailout package. Analysts predict a no vote on the referendum would force Greece to declare bankruptcy and default on its debt. A no vote would also likely force Greece to abandon the euro. In other financial news, John Corzine's brokerage firm MF Global Holdings filed for bankruptcy protection Monday following risky bets on debt issued by Italy, Portugal, and Spain. MF Global becomes the biggest U.S. casualty of Europe's debt crisis and the seventh largest bankruptcy by assets in U.S. history. On Monday, federal investigators discovered as much as $700 million in customer funds missing from the firm. Corzine is a former U.S. senator and New Jersey governor who once ran Goldman Sachs. MF Global employed 2,870 employees worldwide. Police in Richmond, Virginia, and Palm Desert, California, have raided encampments of Occupy Wall Street protesters. In Richmond, police arrested 9 demonstrators and demolished their camp with bulldozers scooping tents and other items into dump trucks. In Palm Desert, California, at least 7 Occupy protesters were arrested in an early morning crackdown. Meanwhile, in Tennessee, a federal judge has ordered the state to drop enforcing new rules that restrict demonstrators' ability to protest. Demonstrators began occupying Legislative Plaza in Nashville on October 9th. Just 3 weeks later, the state enacted new rules without any public review, eliminating their right to gather after 4 p.m. and implementing a 10 p.m. curfew. In other Occupy news, wounded Iraq War veteran Scott Olson reportedly gave a thumbs up to his roommate after being told of the support he'd received from Occupy demonstrators around the world. The 24-year-old suffered a cracked skull and brain swelling after Oakland police fired tear gas into a crowd of protesters last Tuesday. His injury led to anti-police brutality marches and vigils around the country. Olson's still unable to speak and has been communicating to family and friends with a notepad he keeps next to his hospital bed. Members of the UN cultural agency UNESCO voted overwhelmingly Monday to accept the Palestinian Authority as a member in defiance of the United States and Israel. 107 nations backed the Palestinian bid. 14 nations voted against it. 52 nations abstained, including Britain. Following the vote, the United States announced it's withdrawing its financial support for UNESCO. The U.S. provides about 20% of UNESCO's $70 million budget. Nimrod Barkan, Israel's ambassador to UNESCO, criticized the vote.
We regret that the Organization of Science has opted to adopt a resolution which is a resolution of science fiction. Unfortunately, there is no Palestinian state, and therefore one should not have been admitted today. We would like to thank the many countries that voted against it or abstained, realizing that this is the wrong thing for UNESCO to do at this stage because it may hurt the peace process in the future.
The Palestinian Authority has expressed hope that their success in achieving membership in UNESCO will help it be recognized by other international bodies, including the International Atomic Energy Agency and the World Health Organization.
The
full membership will open doors for us, especially to face the deliberate destruction of cultural heritage by the occupation and start to preserve the Palestinian sites which are eligible to be on the World Heritage List.
Attorney for a U.S. Army soldier accused of leading a so-called kill team has admitted his client cut the fingers off dead Afghan civilians as war trophies. The lawyer claims Staff Sergeant Calvin Gibbs was not involved in the actual killing of the Afghans, however. Gibbs is one of 5 soldiers charged with killing 3 Afghan civilians for sport and has pled not guilty to 16 criminal charges. 3 men within the platoon have pleaded guilty. They have agreed to testify it was Gibbs' idea to kill civilians and stage the deaths to make them appear to have been combatants. The men claim Gibbs harbored a deep hatred for Afghans and would refer to them as savages. In March of 2011, photos surfaced of the soldiers posing with corpses of Afghan civilians they'd allegedly just killed. The Kenyan military is being accused of bombing a camp in Somalia housing 1,500 internally displaced households. According to the group Doctors Without Borders, the air raid killed at least 5 people and wounded 45 others, including 31 children. Kenya confirmed it bombed the camp, but claimed the only casualties were members of the militant group al-Shabaab. Kenyan troops invaded Somalia 2 weeks ago to hunt down al-Shabaab fighters. Republican presidential hopeful Herman Cain has acknowledged he was accused of sexual harassment while heading the National Restaurant Association in the 90s. Cain made the admission after Politico reported 2 female employees of the association had complained of sexually suggestive comments and gestures by Cain. When Cain first responded to the controversy Monday, he claimed he was not aware if a payout had been made to the women.
I would be delighted to clear the air. Number one, in all of my over 40 years of business experience, running businesses and corporations, I have never sexually harassed anyone. Number two, while at the Restaurant Association, I was accused of sexual harassment, falsely accused, I might add. As far as a settlement, I am unaware of any sort of settlement. I hope it wasn't for much, because I didn't do anything. But the fact of the matter is, I'm not aware of a settlement that came out of that accusation.
Later in the day, Herman Cain appeared on PBS NewsHour and acknowledged a settlement was paid out.
And in terms of the settlement, which was reached by the Restaurant Association, you as the CEO were not aware of that, or you were aware?
I was not. I was aware that an agreement was reached. The word settlement versus the word agreement, you know, I'm not sure what they called it.
In other campaign news, a new analysis by the Tax Policy Center has confirmed Republican presidential hopeful Rick Perry's flat tax plan would result in a major tax cut for millionaires, but a tax hike for the poor. Millionaires would receive an average tax cut of nearly $500,000 every year under Perry's plan. Meanwhile, a family making $20,000 to $30,000 would pay nearly $500 more in taxes. In other Perry campaign news, video clips of a speech he gave this weekend in New Hampshire. Longtime followers of Perry have expressed shock over how he handled himself on the stage, joking with the audience, amusing himself at times, and repeatedly using strange mannerisms. Clips of the speech have been viewed over 150,000 times on YouTube.
This is such a cool state. I mean, come on, live free or die. I mean, you know, you gotta love that, right? I come from a state, you know, where they had this little place called the Alamo, and they declared victory or death. You know, we're kind of into those slogans, man. It's like, live free or die, victory or death. Bring it.
In news from Libya, NATO ended its bombing campaign Monday. Over the past 7 months, NATO aircraft conducted more than 26,500 bombing raids, including a 9,700 strike missions. NATO said it bombed 5,900 military targets in Libya. Meanwhile, National Transitional Council has elected Abdulrahim Al-Kib to be Libya's interim prime minister. He spent years in exile outside Libya and helped with the financing of the revolt against Gaddafi. He received a doctorate in electrical engineering from North Carolina State University. A California firm that makes internet blocking equipment has acknowledged that the Syrian government has been using at least 13 of its devices to suppress dissent and block access to the internet despite a U.S. trade embargo. The company, Blue Coat Systems, claims it does now know how its devices got to Syria. Since 2004, the United States has prohibited the export without a special license of most U.S. goods and services to Syria. Blue Coat Systems technology has also been used by several U.S. allies for censorship and surveillance, including Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar. Meanwhile, the Committee to Protect Journalists has expressed alarm over the continued disappearance of Syrian journalists and bloggers. At least 13 journalists and bloggers have disappeared since October 24th. 3 other journalists were detained August 4th and have not been heard from since. The blogger Hussein Greer disappeared on October 24th. Days before his disappearance, he wrote on his blog, quote, "Silence does not serve us after today. We don't want a country where we get imprisoned for uttering a word. We want a country that embraces and welcomes words." Thousands of Egyptians protested Monday in Tahrir Square to protest the military's recent detention of prominent blogger Alaa Abd el-Fattah on charges of inciting violence and sabotage. El-Fattah said the army had no legitimacy to even interrogate him and said he would only speak to a civilian official. The Egyptian activist Yahya Wahid took part in Monday's protest.
This case shows how unfair the military council is towards the revolutionaries. The council that originally said we are protecting the revolution is now throwing them into military jails and trying them in military courts. And the others who have robbed the people and killed them are being tried in front of regular courts and are living in 5-star prisons.
Over 1,000 Egyptians marched through central Cairo Monday evening to protest against the arrest and detention of a well-known activist by the military, whom the demonstrators accuse of stifling dissent using the same tactics as the regime of ousted President Hosni Mubarak. Activists gathered in Talat Harb Square in downtown Cairo in the early evening and planned to march to the prison where blogger and activist Alaa Abd el-Fattah is being held for 15 days, pending the investigations into accusations that he incited violence during a demonstration by Coptic Christians October 9th, in which 25 people were killed and clashed with the army. A soon-to-be-released report by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has found freakish weather disasters are striking more often as a result of global warming. According to the Associated Press, the new IPCC report says scientists are virtually certain the world will have more extreme spells of heat and fewer of cold. Heat waves could peak as much as 5 degrees hotter by mid-century and even 9 degrees hotter by the end of the century. In other climate news, prominent skeptic of global warming has admitted climate change is real and now says the rising levels of greenhouse gases could have a disastrous impact on the world. Richard Miller, who works at the University of California, Berkeley and Lawrence Berkeley National Labs, said he spent the last 2 years studying the climate data. He found the land is 1.6 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than in the 50s. Muller's change of heart has made headlines in part because of who funds his research. A quarter of the $600,000 of his research funding came from the right-wing Charles Koch Foundation. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.